Hello and welcome to Destined Travel. This time, we're exploring the pearl of the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka. Alright, let's get oriented. Sri Lanka is an island located in the Indian Ocean, right off the southern coast of India. It's about the size of West Virginia or Croatia. The capital is Sri Jayawardenepura Kotte, which is really just a neighborhood of its largest city, Colombo. There are around 22 million people who live on the island, and the major languages are Sinhala and Tamil. But many people, especially in tourist-facing jobs, do speak English. The country was a British colony for around 150 years. The currency is the Sri Lankan rupee, and I would rank the country about a 3 out of 10 on the expensive scale, with 1 being the cheapest and 10 the most expensive. Restaurants, nice hotels, and transportation are pretty cheap, so you can get a luxury vacation here for a reasonable price. The problem, though, is getting there. Flights to and from Sri Lanka are expensive for most of the world. On this trip, we'll start at Colombo, which is Sri Lanka's largest city. Here, we'll explore the country's colonial and modern points of interest. Our next stop is Lunuganga, the country estate of Sri Lanka's most famous architect and one of its most famous citizens, period, Geoffrey Bawa. And finally, we'll head to Galle on the southern coast. Here, we'll check out the historic fort and chat with one of the country's famous stilt fishermen. Coming from abroad, you'll almost certainly be flying into and out of Colombo's Bandaranaike airport. By the way, you'll have to get used to long names in Sri Lanka. They're everywhere. Colombo's a city of almost 6 million people, but most tourists don't even spend a night here. Instead, they prefer to head out directly to the tea country or to the beach. But trust me, don't make that mistake. Take at least a day to see what the commercial and political heart of the country has to offer. You'll get a greater appreciation of the culture and energy of modern Sri Lanka from your time in the capital than your time anywhere else on the island. First, check out Gangaramaya Buddhist Temple. Completed in the late 1800s, it's one of the most prominent Buddhist temples in Colombo. Try to visit the site during the day if you can. With fewer people around, you can actually observe how devotees take their time at the temple and witness the impact that Buddhism has on the lives of most Sri Lankans. The temple is an eclectic complex. Different parts were built during different times by different people. Nestled in one area, you'll find a Bodhi tree, which is the same type of tree that the Buddha meditated under to achieve enlightenment. You might also see some Buddhist monks walking around. The temple houses an active Buddhist educational facility. And don't miss the elephant head in the main pavilion. In Africa, almost all male and female elephants grow tusks, but in Sri Lanka, less than 10% of only the male elephants do, so a tusker is very sacred. The Gangaramaya temple also has a room depicting a massive statue of Buddha with paintings of scenes from his life. The Buddha was born about 2,500 years ago as Siddhartha Gautama, a prince of a wealthy kingdom in what is now Nepal. His father, the king, had heard of a prophecy that the son would give up royal life and grow up to become a religious figure instead. Scared, the father sheltered Siddhartha in the palace and did not allow his son to see any human suffering or misery throughout his childhood. Finally, at the age of 29, Siddhartha left the palace for the first time, and he saw a sick man, an old man, and a dead man. As was prophesied, this experience shocked him, and Siddhartha gave up the throne to become a wandering monk. He meditated under a Bodhi tree, like we talked about, and achieved nirvana, or enlightenment. He realized that although life is suffering, with meditation, virtue, and good behavior, salvation is possible. This message has attracted disciples from all over the world. Today, over 500 million people globally are Buddhists, including Richard Gere and about 3 out of 4 Sri Lankans. Make sure you spend at least some time at the Sima Malika part of the temple. Although it's technically part of the Gangaramaya complex, Sima Malika is separate from the main area. The current version was built in the 1970s. It's located on a lake, and it's an island of tranquility surrounded by some of the tallest buildings and busiest streets in Colombo. The temple was designed by Geoffrey Bawa, Sri Lanka's most famous architect, and the guy whose country estate we're going to be visiting later. The construction costs, though, were covered by a prominent Sri Lankan Muslim family, and the temple even has some statues of Hindu gods. The place is a live example of the major religions of Sri Lanka interconnecting. Like Sima Malika, Sri Lanka's new parliament building was also designed by Geoffrey Bawa, and both buildings are great examples of the architectural style known as tropical modernism. We'll talk more about that later. Obviously, a random tourist can't just walk inside Parliament, but it is worth looking out for the building as you drive around. I loved how distinctive the design is. It's a striking change from the Greco-Roman style buildings that still tend to dominate post-colonial architecture, even decades after independence. Speaking of independence, our next stop is Independence Square. This monument was built to commemorate Sri Lanka's 1948 independence from Great Britain. Sri Lanka has been inhabited for about 100,000 years. At various points, it was either ruled or influenced by South Indian, Southeast Asian, or Arab influences. The Portuguese, though, kicked off the era of European colonization in the 1500s. Originally, they just established a couple of forts to control trading routes, but over time they took over the coastal areas. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch had booted out the Portuguese and took over the coastal regions themselves. But again, neither the Dutch nor the Portuguese managed to fully subjugate the island. The interior kingdom of Kandy, that's Kandy with a K, managed to survive. In 1796, the British took over the island from the Dutch. At that time, the Netherlands were occupied by Napoleon, and the British were scared that if Sri Lanka, or Ceylon, as the island was named then, were to fall to the French, it would threaten British interests in South Asia. The British did succeed in finally conquering the Kingdom of Kandy in 1815, and therefore were able to unite the entire island under their rule. And fun fact, the design of the modern Independence Memorial Hall was actually based on the pavilion where the last king of Kandy signed away Sri Lankan sovereignty to the British way back in 1815. Sri Lanka remained a British colony for 150 years, but after World War II, colonialism wasn't really in vogue anymore. Sri Lanka became a self-governing dominion in 1948. This means that although the country had its own parliament and basically made its own laws, the Queen of England was still the figurehead head of state. Sri Lanka declared full independence from the UK in 1972. So today, it has both a president, who's the head of state, and a prime minister. And Independence Square has a statue of D.S. Senanayake, who was the first prime minister, right outside of the main hall. The hall is still used for a number of ceremonial functions today, especially by government officials. But when I visited during the middle of a weekday, it was basically empty. There were just a couple of security guards around to keep me company. Alright, by now it's hot and you're hungry, so it's time for a snack break. And when you're in South Asia, that can only mean one thing: mangoes. And if you don't live in the tropics, then trust me when I say that you haven't eaten a real mango until you've eaten a tropical mango. You can find over a dozen types of this fruit in Sri Lanka. I recommend just walking to a local fruit stall and asking for a couple to sample from the seller. Make sure you try the Alfonso mango and the sour mango in particular. You'll probably not have something like this where you're from. Alright, now that you're a bit better off and refreshed, we're going to still stick around in Colombo and head to Petta Market. It's a bazaar near Sri Lanka's port. This area is my favorite part of the city. It's just full of vitality and energy. The area has a combination of open air and closed shops, selling just about anything and everything. Keep your wits about you though. This place can be intense. The traffic and commotion might be overwhelming. Many of the shops here are owned by Muslim traders, as has been the case for generations. And so probably not surprisingly, the most prominent building in the area is the Red Mosque. Its red and white stripes are hard to miss from the street. Walking distance from Petta Market is the Fort Railway train station. If you're taking the train to go to other parts of Sri Lanka, you'll probably stop and start your journey here. It's simply beautiful. It's a Victorian-era station, and you can see the light reflecting off the trusses during sunrise and sunset. Even if you're not going or coming from anywhere, it's a photographer's paradise and totally worth a visit. The place is jam-packed during rush hour, and it's a real cross-section of how the urban middle class is going about their day in Colombo. Our next stop is Colombo Port. The port has been around for thousands of years, and it's one of the most important strategic choke points in South Asia. Today, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, and US interests are competing for control over the jetties, with the Chinese in particular injecting massive sums of money into expanding the port's trade capacity. The Chinese have made their investments in Colombo a major part of something called the Belt and Road Initiative. This initiative looks to finance infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and ports in countries all around the world. It's a political and economic project. It wants to connect these countries to China. And to exert its soft power, the Chinese government has actually gotten a few Chinese social media stars to learn Sinhala, which is a local Sri Lankan language, in order to become influencers on the island. It's just amazing to see how important the social media game has become.
Electricity nasty karna epa kiyala.
While near the port, you should also check out the Sri Kailaswanathan Kovil. By the way, the word Kovil means Hindu temple in Sri Lanka. So just using the word temple means Buddhist temple, but the word Kovil, which comes from Tamil, an Indian language, means Hindu temple. You'll have to take unpaved back streets to get to this Kovil, making it a bit of a hidden jewel. It's an active religious site and doesn't get many tourists, which to me makes it all the more special. I was lucky enough to catch the tail end of a prayer when I visited inside. The temple has an impressive entrance tower with carvings of Hindu gods. This entrance tower is called a Gopuram, and it is a distinctive feature of Hindu temples from South India. It's a monument to the impact that waves of migrations of Tamils, who are an ethnic group with their own language originally from South India, have had on the island itself. You'll see these kovils scattered throughout Sri Lanka, with many of them being in the north, where Tamils are more prominent. The original Koval structure was built in the late 1700s, but it's been rebuilt and expanded several times. I love being at the temple as the sun set, with the commercial skyline of New Colombo providing a great backdrop to the Gopuram. As the sun sets, Galle Face Green is a great place to take in the view. It's a long park and beach that faces the ocean, and it's got a lot of street vendors selling street food along the beach. A lot of Sri Lanka's largest and newest hotels are located along Galle Face Green, so you might even be able to walk to the beach depending on where you're staying. Try and grab a drink at the 150-year-old Galle Face Hotel, Colombo's most prominent place to see and be seen. When I went, the place was crawling with police, because the president actually happened to be there to catch a wedding. Head downstairs and get a table with an ocean view. And when you're there, get a cocktail made with Ceylon Arak, which is Sri Lanka's native alcohol. Arak is made from the sap of coconut palm flowers and tastes a lot like whiskey. Make sure you get the expensive kind though. Cheap Arak, like cheap vodka and, well, cheap anything, will really give you a horrible hangover. But, well, either the cheap or the expensive kind will get the job done. For dinner and some nightlife, we're heading now over to the Dutch Hospital, which is an old colonial hospital, as the name indicates, that's been turned into a shopping and dining district. The building was constructed in the late 1600s, but much of the original site was destroyed in a bombing during the Sri Lankan Civil War in the last 20 years. It's now been restored and houses some boutique shops, bars, and the best restaurant in Sri Lanka, the Ministry of Crab. The Ministry of Crab is regularly ranked as one of the best restaurants in the world, and it's part owned by two of the greatest cricket players in Sri Lanka's history, Mahela Jayawardena and Kumara Sangakkara. Say that 10 times quickly. These two helped Sri Lanka, which is a small country, win the Cricket World Cup in 1996 and place second in 2011. They're probably the two most popular people on the island.
Century made when the chips were down by a fantastic batsman.
But back to the food. You can choose the size and preparation method of the crab, with the Crabzilla size weighing in at 2 kilograms or around 4.5 pounds. You do need to call for a reservation in advance, but trust me, the experience is worth the hassle. Thanks again for tuning into Destined Travel. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and notification icon to get updated videos on Sri Lanka and other locations around the world. Alright, now that we're hangover free and full of all the sights, sounds, and smells that Colombo has to offer, let's go somewhere a bit more relaxed. We're now headed to Lunuganga, the country home of one of history's most influential architects, Geoffrey Bawa. Geoffrey Bawa was a burgher, which is to say he was a racial mix of European and Sri Lankan. He started his life off as a lawyer, but switched careers, becoming an architect when he was almost 40 years old. He pioneered an architectural style known as tropical modernism. High-end architecture in the tropics was previously just European architecture, but moved to a tropical climate. The buildings were closed off and stuffy because they were really intended for a much colder climate. But Bawa, he changed the game. He used local building materials and open floor plans, and tried to integrate natural landscapes into the structures. His buildings allowed light and breeze to flow through, and showed off local plants and trees. He designed a lot of luxury hotels that populate Sri Lanka, including the famous Kandalama Hotel. But if you only have time to visit one of his creations, I strongly recommend going to Lunuganga. It used to be a cinnamon and rubber plantation, but Bawa bought and cleared the land, and painstakingly designed a country estate. After Bawa's death, his friends created a trust to manage the place, and it's now turned into a boutique hotel and tourist attraction. I recommend taking the guided group tour, there are a couple of these that leave every day, and having lunch on the veranda afterwards, looking out on the garden below. These are the vibes. Bawa's attention to detail is evident in every corner of Lunuganga. This frangipani tree is actually comprised of 2 trees that were grafted together, and Bawa hung weights on one set of the branches so that the tree would bend into a particular shape. The decorations include influences from Western Europe and local Sri Lankan motifs. Bawa would spend a lot of time in Italy. He hung different bells around the property so that if he needed something, his servants would know exactly where to find him, just by the sound that particular bell made. The property also has modern sculptures and modern art, including some prototypes of designs that Bawa himself created. Next, we're heading to Galle on the southwestern coast of Sri Lanka. This seaside town has been a port for thousands of years, but what you see today was mostly created by the Dutch in the mid-1600s onwards. Galle Fort has been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its architecture, hotels, and restaurants make it one of the most popular destinations in Sri Lanka. You'll see tons of tourists walking around when you're there. A must-do is to walk along the ramparts of Galle Fort, going from the lighthouse to the clock tower. The walk is right along the water, so you'll get a good amount of sea breeze and some fresh air. The lighthouse is still in use by ships. Its white exterior, flanked by coconut trees, make it for a great Instagram backdrop. The stroll along the water should take you about an hour, and that'll leave you plenty of time to take photos along the way too. The walls are well preserved, with cannons still lying around. The size and number of these armaments should give you a sense of just how important Galle was to the Dutch. Galle Fort was one of the most valuable holdings of the Dutch East India Company. It secured much of the spice and fabric trade that made the Netherlands the richest country in the world in the mid-1600s. And on the other end of the ramparts is the Galle Clock Tower, which was actually a thank you memorial built by a hospital patient to his doctor. It was built in the late 1800s, and it's now a landmark and backdrop to all sorts of shenanigans. When I was there, I saw people selling popcorn, getting engaged, and even a group of people making a music video. It was different people doing each one of those things, by the way. Next, let's head into the main square itself. The design of the shops and houses in Galle Fort is as diverse as the ships that still dock here. Walking down the street, you can feel like you're in Amsterdam, London, and Doha, depending on where you look. Many of the buildings have been lovingly restored into restaurants and boutique hotels. But they still manage to retain much of the character of the neighborhood, while installing modern amenities like swimming pools and outdoor bars. The whole thing is very well done. I recommend staying in this part of town if you can, because it actually gets pretty lively at night. It's a good place to go shopping for souvenirs during the day too. Everything is close by and there's a ton of selection. One of the iconic images of Sri Lanka is the sunrise or sunset photo of this famous stilt fisherman. You might have seen a few of these shots on the cover of your favorite travel magazine. These men are found in Galle, still plying their trade. Nowadays, they don't really do it for food anymore, just for tips from tourists. We spoke with one fisherman who explained what his work was like. And here's a tip. If you give the fishermen a tip, they might actually let you get up on the stilts yourself and try your hand at the fishing game. I recommend going there around sunset. The light is just magical at this time. And in any case, the fishermen are only out during sunrise and sunset. Thanks again for tuning in to Destined Travel. We hope you enjoyed this video on Sri Lanka. Make sure you hit the like, notification, and subscribe buttons in order to get updated videos on Sri Lanka and other locations around the world. Thanks again.